All right. This never happens. Everyone just settles down and gets quiet. Usually I have to try to talk over it and get everyone to realize that we're starting, but that's great. Welcome, everybody. I think looking around the room, I think most everybody was here last night, right? Either was here or couldn't be here for some reason. It was a success, I would say. I certainly count it as a success. Got to meet some folks from the community, and like it was said, we had fellowship with one another as well. So it was a good time. And again, I would say, if you weren't there, you missed out. But I think everybody in here was there, so that's good. Don's going to start us out with a word of prayer, and then we'll get started. Those that are not here with us today, one other thing I'll mention, I'll try to mention it in the next hour or two for those that aren't here. I got a call from Liz this morning saying that she wasn't feeling quite right. So she didn't really feel sick, but she didn't feel exactly right either. So she didn't feel comfortable driving. So just wanted, because she's always here. So just wanted to, if you were wondering why she isn't, I thought I'd let y'all know that I got that call. So hopefully she'll be feeling back to herself later today, if not in the next day or two. Keep her in your prayers, just in case. Okay. Brothers, let's see. We left off at page 70. We were, if I recall correctly, we were talking through the discussion questions at the end of chapter 7. I don't know that, I recall talking through 1 and 2. Number 3, can you think of someone who helped you work out peacefully a problem that existed between you and another person? How do you feel towards this peacemaker? I think we touched on that one just a little bit too. Anybody have any other thoughts on the questions or the chapter before we moved on? If not, we'll get into chapter 8. Okay, so chapter 8. Watch the Lamb. He's going to kind of touch back upon one of the themes from the Old Testament. Starting out, he says, several years ago, I was able to hear a Christian college chorus sing a song called Watch the Lamb. Does anybody know this song? I'm not familiar with it. There's one I think Pete leads from time to time called The Lamb of God. That's a great song. But Watch the Lamb, I'm not familiar with. It says, written from the perspective of Simon of Cyrene, the song describes Simon traveling to Jerusalem with his 2 sons and a small lamb for the Passover feast. The job of the 2 sons is to watch the lamb they were to sacrifice in Jerusalem. The journey turns from a time of worship and celebration to a trip of terror as the family find themselves caught up in the terrible events surrounding the cross. Which, of course, you think of all the people that would have been assembled there at that time, none of them knew. None of them knew what was going to happen. We all know because we're reading the story retroactively. As I've said before, I think even the apostles, the ones who were with them, even though he had indicated to them time and time again, I don't think they understood. At least I don't think they understood fully what was about to unfold. Could be wrong about that, but that's the impression I get. Simon describes the brutally beaten Jesus and the screaming crowd. He details the horror of having to carry the cross and feeling the blood of Jesus as it drops and runs down Simon's cheek. Simon's heart is touched as he hears the words, Father, forgive them, sees the look of love in the eyes of the Savior. The song ends with Simon and his son standing beneath the cross where the lifeless body of Jesus hangs. The boys are weeping because they let the little lamb get away. They're confused and afraid and want to know what's happening around them. Their dad picks them up and they turn to face the cross. Simon tells the boys to watch the lamb. The boys didn't need their lamb anymore because God had provided one. You can see, I don't know, we don't have any folks in here who lead songs, do we? I don't think so. But maybe if I can remember, I'll check with one of them and see if they can find this song, if any of them are familiar with it. It sounds like a good one. There were few dry eyes in the audience when the song ended. Because when hearts are given a glimpse of the Lamb of God, they often break. In our last chapter, we explored the role Christ played in repairing our relationship with God. In this lesson, we focus on Christ as the atoning sacrifice for sin. We're seeking the antivenom to conquer the power of Satan's poison. The key is to watch the Lamb. We will focus on the sacrifice and Savior as we watch the Lamb. From time to time, I encounter things that I find interesting, but then I debate with myself whether I should point it out or not. One such example, we discussed a week or two ago, what are the exact words that Jesus said as he's sitting at the table and he hands the bread and the fruit of the vine to his followers? The exact words. The answer is, I don't know, because it's recorded in 4 places. It's in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and 1 Corinthians, and none of them agree. They're all very similar, but they're different. It's like they all agree in the gist of it and the idea, but if you want to know the exact words that were said, I couldn't tell you. You would have to pick one of the 4. And not terribly problematic for me, right? Again, they're all very close to one another. Yeah, but for some people, that could pose a problem. I'm faced with a similar dilemma here as I'm reading about this idea of Jesus as a lamb. There's something really, really interesting about this that I want to point out because I find it interesting. But again, some people could find it problematic. We'll take a poll. Do you want to hear it or not? It could be one of those don't shoot the messenger kind of cases, right? It's like I'm going to just point out exactly what's here. Right? I didn't write it, so if I point something out to you that's there, don't take it out on me. Show of hands. Who's interested? Like I said, don't blame the messenger. Okay, so Paul in 1 Corinthians, if I'm not mistaken, talks about Jesus as the Passover lamb. Other than that one instance, the 4 gospel account writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, only one of them describes Jesus as a lamb. Which one is it? John. The metaphor is unique to John. John uses it a lot. It's in the gospel account of John in multiple places. It's also in Revelation in multiple places. The others don't do this. Here's another question, and this one may be a bit trickier. You have to pay close attention. The day that Jesus dies is what day? I'm sorry? Passover. Any other thoughts? This has to do with John specifically. So, you look at the different gospel accounts. There are things that are unique to each of them. For example, John never mentions Pharisees, never mentions hell. Interestingly enough, Paul never does either. In all of his writings, Paul also never explicitly mentions hell. But there are interesting things like this. Luke has a lot of things that the others don't, especially a lot of parables that are unique to Luke. So in Matthew, Mark, Luke, they're gathered there on the final night, and Jesus tells what to Peter before they even come to the room to have the meal. He tells Peter to go and do something. What? Go and find a room so that we can partake of the Passover together, correct? And then as they're eating the meal, what happens? He does, but how? They're eating the Passover meal. And he takes the elements of the meal and what's the word I'm looking for? Recontextualizes. He changes the meaning of the elements, right? Here's the bread. They're eating the Passover. He takes the Passover meal and kind of reappropriates it into a New Testament worship setting, correct? This bread is my body. this fruit of the vine is my blood. But he takes the Passover meal and changes it, right? So this Passover is no longer about the Israelites being passed over by God, right? They could have been killed, but they were spared. God showed mercy. Now, in the New Testament, I'm the Passover, right? You're going to live, right? God is going to pass over you because you're covered by my blood, right? That's the idea. Correct, yeah. So it's taking something symbolic in the Old Covenant and changing it to suit the new, right? Under the Old Covenant, there was this Passover lamb, and if the house was covered by the blood of the lamb, right? If they had the blood around the door frame, it would be passed over. God would not visit that house and take out his wrath upon them, correct? In the New Testament, Jesus is the Passover, right? God will pass over those who are again covered by the blood. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it's a Passover meal. John does not mention this institution of the Lord's Supper. It's only in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, right? Why people are, when someone is giving their thoughts for the communion before we partake of it, and they say, open to this passage, it's going to be, if they're talking, unless they're going completely something different to borrow a thought, it's going to be Matthew, Mark, Luke, or 1 Corinthians. Because that's where you, again, like I mentioned earlier, the wording, it's in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and 1 Corinthians. Because Matthew, Mark, and Luke describe it, and then Paul revisits it, okay? John doesn't mention it at all. So I come back to the question I posed a few moments ago. What day is it when he dies? Passover, you would say Passover. Well, not necessarily the exact day of the week. Well, because the Passover can fall on different days, right? Yeah, the day of the week comes into play, but so John, and again, I'm merely pointing out something that's here. Feel free to visit it on your own. In John, let me see. I have jotted this down. So first of all, in John, there is a dinner, right? And it is around Passover time, but he doesn't mention it being a Passover dinner. And where he institutes the Lord's Supper, it doesn't happen in John. John 18:28, it says, Then led they Jesus from Caiaphas unto the hall of judgment, and it was early, and they themselves went not into the judgment hall, lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover. So this is Jesus that night before he's going into the judgment hall. The Jewish leaders, the ones who have set him up and are holding this kangaroo court, they're worried about defiling themselves because the Passover is about to happen, and they don't want that to be a problem. Later on, John 19:14, it says, And it was the preparation of the Passover in about the 6th hour, and he said unto the Jews, Behold your king. So in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus dies on the Passover because he is the Passover. It's taking the Old Testament Passover and recontextualizing it for the New Testament. In John, it's the day before the Passover. Again, all the people are worried about it. They're like, we have to hurry up. In fact, in John, when they come to break the bones, right? Why do they come to break the bones? Remember, they break the bones of the two, then they go to break his, and they don't have to because he's already dead. Why do they show up to come and break the bones? They've got to hurry up and get this over with because Passover's coming, and we got to have this done before the Passover, right? The question then is why? Why would it be one way in the three, but presumably different in John? And it comes back to this idea of the lamb. Right. Well, yeah, to hasten it, right? It's like Passover's happening. We got to get this business finished with because this can't be continuing into the Passover. It's the day before. It's being prepared. The difference would be, and again, others have argued this, and I don't necessarily see a problem with it. Some could. In John, Jesus is the Lamb. Again, he's the only one that describes him that way. The others don't. In John, Jesus the Lamb is killed at the same time all the other lambs are being killed because the Passover is the next day. He's the Lamb. On the day that he's crucified, the lambs are being slaughtered. And so he's getting killed because he's the Lamb. Does that make sense? He's the sacrificial lamb. So the day before Passover, as it's being prepared, he dies. And that makes sense, right? Because he's the Lamb. But again, John's the only one who calls him the Lamb. Right. That's also unique to John. That's not in the others either. Because again, it's happening on the day before the Passover. In the other three, he's not described as the Lamb. Rather, he dies at the Passover because he's taking the place of the Passover. Does that make sense? It's interesting. I find it, again, like I said when we took the vote, and y'all said, do you want me to point this out to you or not? Don't shoot the messenger, right? I didn't write it. But I find it interesting, kind of like the thing with the last words. I don't necessarily see a huge conflict there, but I find it fascinating, and it fits the metaphor that John uses. Any thoughts or anything? Right. In fact, and off the top of my head, that's what I was just looking for. There is one where he specifically says, touch me, right, to Thomas. There's one, too, where he eats something. And I've heard before that that's significant because there are some people in the first century who have the notion that when he comes back from the dead, he's not physically, Gnostics, right? If you've ever heard of Gnosticism, Gnostics think he's not physically there, right? He's just like a shadow or a shade of a person. So in one of these accounts, when he comes to visit the disciples, he eats the fish, right, to prove I'm physically here, right? The same as when he asks Thomas to touch, you know, it's like you can feel where the holes are. It's interesting, and if you pay, it's a fascinating thing. You can take the three. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are called the synoptics because the word synoptic means to see the same way. It's a fascinating exercise to take Matthew, Mark, and Luke and put them side by side and kind of see the same thing in each and kind of go across. Because oftentimes they are verbatim identical to one another. Word for word exactly the same. Other times they aren't, and it's interesting. The most interesting thing, though, is that you can't do that with John because very little of what's in John is in the other three and vice versa. John is totally different. You know, chapter 2, the wedding feast at Cana, Nicodemus in 3, the woman at the well in 4, the debate with the Pharisees in 5, the bread of life discourse in 6. None of that is in the other three. So it's interesting. In fact, here's a bit of trivia. There's only one miracle that's in all 4. Which one? Does anyone happen to know? One miracle that appears in all 4 of them. feeding of the 5,000 with the loaves of fishes. In John, it's in chapter 6, right? And then afterward, he has that whole discourse. So it's interesting. Like I said, though, you have to be well grounded to kind of head down those paths. Otherwise, it could cause you to start having a lot of questions and things. Like I said, with respect to the wording when he's instituting the Lord's Supper, you know, to me, it's not sufficiently different to constitute a crisis, but it's interesting. And it's one of those things. So tell me what the exact wording is. I'm like, I can't. And anyone who also tells you they can, they also can't. Because all four of them are not the same. Okay. Any other thoughts or questions before we move on? Hopefully y'all find that interesting. I mean, I do. I find it fascinating to pick up on things like these. Much more severely beaten than the two other guys, right? I mean, maybe that's something you don't tend to think about, but granted, crucifixion was a horrific, gruesome death. But when you think about the three crosses there, the other two guys are also suffering excruciating pain, and I'm sure they probably also had been scourged before being put up there, but not nearly to the. I mean, he had been so severely scourged and beaten, far more than a typical person would have been. Because you remember Pilate, when he was trying to, I'm convinced, Pilate tried every trick he could think of to get out of it. He's like, oh, this isn't my jurisdiction. You know, then he comes back, he's like, well, we've got this custom. I'll let someone, he tries a number of things to weasel his way out of it. But one of the last things he tries is, I'll just beat him unrecognizable. And then they'll be satisfied with that, and I'll let him go. And I think that's what he thought would happen. He's like, well, because he brings him out, you know, and he's like, well, here he is, and he's been severely beaten. And I believe in Pilate's mind, he's like, this will satisfy them. I can let him go. But it didn't, and so he ended up putting him on the cross anyway. But yeah, when you have these three people on the cross, he had already been beaten far, far worse than others would have been. So, right, you talk about, you know, they come to break the bones. They break the bones of the thieves on either side, but Jesus is already dead, right? Because, again, he came into it so much worse off than the other two would have. They're not all in the same. They're not all in the same state as they're put up there. Oh yeah, he's a weasel. He's a politician. He's yeah. Oh yeah. Right. A while back, we had a sermon about the idea of archetypes. Judas is the betrayer, right? Pilate is the weasel. He's the politician. Because he knows he's innocent, right? He makes it clear that he knows he's innocent. And again, like I said, he tries at least 6 or 7 different attempts to get out of it. He knows he's innocent. But when push comes to shove, he's a weasel. He's a politician. He's going to do what he needs to do to it's like, you remember when Caiaphas and the others, after Jesus healed Lazarus in John 11, they're conspiring together, and they say, basically, oh, well, we have to do this, because if we don't, we're going to lose our situation. Meaning, the Romans are going to, if things keep spiraling out of control and the crowds keep getting up in arms because of this Jesus guy, the Romans are going to take away what power they had some power, right? The Romans let them kind of self-govern. They're going to take that away, and we can't let that happen, so we've got to kill him. The same with Pilate. He knows he shouldn't do it, but when it comes down to it and he can't find another way out, he does it. Which way is north? That way. They're cut from the same cloth, all of them, both sides. All right. Any other thoughts? Now, just in case you're curious, when this question comes up, I think sometimes people who feel compelled to square the circle will say, well, the Passover is like a week long, right? So it all just kind of encompasses all the stuff, and I don't know. To me, it makes a bit more sense that Matthew, Mark, and Luke kind of see it one way and John another, but that's not necessarily problematic, I don't think. And again, it fits with John's metaphors. But anyway, let's see. Continuing on page 72, sacrifice of the lamb. Abram had marched from his homeland with God's promise of a great land, a great nation, and a great blessing echoing in his mind. Genesis 12. And we talked about that a lot here recently. The seed promise goes back to Genesis 12. Who's the seed? Is it Abraham or is it Jesus? Paul's detractors would say it's not Abraham, Isaac. They would say it's Isaac. Paul says, no, it's not, it's Jesus. The same hope beyond Abraham's descendants, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. But by the time of the events recorded in Exodus 3, that hope was gone. 400 years of slavery had ground it into the Egyptian sand. Hundreds of miles away, a simple shepherd stood on a mountainside staring at a bush that burned but was not consumed. While God's people labored under the taskmaster's whips, this shepherd, whom God had been training for 80 years, reluctantly obeyed God's command. Bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. Help was on the way. Does anybody else ever feel sorry for Moses? I do. I sympathize with them a bit. He didn't want to do it either. Pilate didn't want to crucify Jesus. Moses didn't want to go and execute this mission. But eventually, just like Pilate, he ran out of excuses. But, the difference is Pilate ended up, when he ran out of all the available options to try to get out of it, Pilate did the wrong thing, Moses did the right thing, right? I guess you can be pushed in either direction. But not only does he go and do it reluctantly, as is pointed out in the book, he didn't want to do it. But even then, you find him there in Numbers in chapter 11, just so fed up with the people that he's begging God to strike him dead on the spot. I sometimes feel for Moses. Continuing on, Ethan was afraid. Ethan was excited. Ethan was 8 years old. He lived in the land of Goshen in Egypt. Like his father before him, he was the son of a slave. He was the oldest child of his parents. Strange things had been happening since the arrival of Moses. Plague after plague had come upon the Egyptians: water to blood, frogs, lice, flies, dead cattle, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, and now the death of the firstborn. Ethan was a firstborn. He heard that the Lord's angel was coming that night. It was drawing close to midnight. Would the destroyer come soon? Would he be spared? Ethan's father saw the worried look on his face and said, "You're safe, my son. The blood of the lamb is upon the lintel and doorposts of our home. The blood will save you. Will be delivered this night from the hands of the Egyptians. The Lord commanded us to eat while standing so that we might leave quickly." Incidentally, in the communion, we specifically eat unleavened bread. Again, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the Lord's Supper is a reappropriation of the Passover feast. Why is the bread unleavened? Correct, yes. And as the Egyptians are going to leave Egypt, as he mentions here, they're told to eat standing so that they can run. The same is true with the bread. It's like you're going to have to leave here so quickly, you don't have time to wait for the yeast to work and for the bread to rise. The bread needs to be unleavened. So today in the church, we have unleavened bread in the Lord's Supper because, again, he took the Passover feast, which is unleavened bread, and again, changed the context of it. So now under the Old Testament, this Passover feast reminds the Israelites of when the houses that were covered by the blood of the Lamb were spared from God's wrath. The New Testament, those who are likewise covered by the blood of the Lamb are spared from God's wrath. Why do we specifically have unleavened bread? Because that's what it was in the Old Testament that got changed to the New. And it was unleavened specifically because they had to leave so fast they didn't have time for the yeast to rise. He tells the son, you're safe, don't worry, we have the blood. The Lord commanded us to eat standing so we might leave quickly. Suddenly Ethan heard a noise outside and felt a chill run up his spine. It lasted only a minute and then passed. Thank God for the Lamb. And he points out the story of Ethan is only make-believe. Just in case as I'm reading this, you're wondering to yourself, who is Ethan? I haven't heard of him. But it fits the events recorded in Exodus 12 and 13. God commanded the people to sacrifice a perfect, unblemished lamb. They were to eat the meat without breaking the bones, spread the blood on the doorposts and lintels of their homes. The death angel saw the blood on the door, he would pass over and spare the firstborn. God delivered his people from bondage in Egypt, and they were to observe this Passover meal each year to commemorate the event. Incidentally, later on, I forget if this is in Exodus or in Numbers, but God still demands a firstborn sacrifice of the Israelites, but he accepts something else in its place. Does anyone happen to recall? The firstborn that opens the matrix shall be holy to the Lord. Right? For the firstborn child belongs to God, but an exception is made, and he takes something else in its place. The Levites. Right? So it's like the Levites will be they'll serve the purpose of my priesthood in place of the entire nation's firstborn. So he passes over. God delivered his people from bondage in Egypt. They were to observe this Passover meal each year to commemorate the event. Sacrifice became central to the Israelites' worship of God. Lambs and young rams were a vital part of almost every sacrifice in the Old Testament. Leviticus 1 through 7 details the 5 key sacrifices: the burnt offering for general sin, the grain offering for commitment to God, the peace offering for gratitude and communion with God, the sin offering for purification, and the guilt offering for repaying those wronged by sin, both God and man. And it goes through in excruciating detail exactly how these various sacrifices, when they're to be done, how they're to be done. They have very specific instructions. The Israelites learned that the shedding of blood was necessary to save one from death. Countless lambs died because of the sins of humanity, but their blood was not enough. Hebrews 10:4, the blood of bulls and goats cannot take away sin. Isaiah foretold of another lamb who, and again, like I've told y'all umpteen bazillion times, I would argue this is the lesson of the Old Testament, right? This is when you come to the New Testament, and Paul in particular talks about the Old Covenant, the law of Moses being a tutor to bring us to Christ. In Romans, he talks about the fact that it taught lessons. It was never meant to save mankind. This, what he just said here, I would argue is the lesson. Sin is a very, very expensive and dangerous thing to fix. And the fact that the old law doesn't fix it, rather it points to something new, I think Paul argues in Galatians 3 in particular, is something that they should have picked up on. But he quotes from Isaiah 53, all we like sheep have gone astray. We've turned everyone to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter, and a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. All right, anybody have anything else to add? I was going to wrap up, and we're a few minutes early for that, but I don't really want to get into a whole new section because it goes on for 3 pages. Anybody have anything else? Any thoughts, comments, questions, concerns? Oh, yeah, that's true. I could pull it up on Google. It sounded like an interesting song. I've never heard it before. I only know him having referenced it here. But yeah, that's true. Anybody else? If not, I'll let you off the hook a few minutes early here, and we'll pick back up next time, Lord willing. Page 73.